Hi, I'm Sophia Anderson, 28, sitting at my parents' family dining table. What was supposed to be a dinner to celebrate quickly turned into something else. My family has always treated me like I didn't matter, the invisible daughter who never quite lived up to their expectations. To them, I'm just the girl with an office job. When my brother's fiancée, Emma, asked what I do for a living, my mom, Linda, laughed like it was a joke. Nobody could have predicted what would happen when Emma Googled my name. But before I get into that, let me ask, where are you watching from today? If you're enjoying this so far, hit that like button and subscribe. You'll want to stick around to see how my family's reactions changed when they learned who I really am. I grew up in a small, neat residential area in Clearview, Ohio, where reputation was everything. Success was measured by the size of your house and where your kids went to school. Our two-level Victorian house, with its perfectly maintained garden and seasonal door decorations, looked like the perfect family home on the outside. But inside, things were different. My mom, with her perfectly done hair and golf club membership, made sure everything revolved around appearances and achievement. My dad, David, an accountant, was quiet and kind, but always let my mom make the decisions. He didn't like conflict and often sacrificed his own feelings to keep the peace. Then there was my brother, James, 3 years older and the golden child. From his first Little League home run to his valedictorian speech in secondary school, James could do no wrong. His room was a shrine to his accomplishments, sports awards, academic medals, mounted certificates. Our parents were always there, cheering him on, snapping pictures, and telling anyone who would listen, "That's our son." My earliest memory of feeling overlooked happened when I was 9. I had written a story about a girl who could talk to animals. My 4th grade teacher gave it an A+ and wrote "extraordinary imagination" on it. I couldn't wait to show my parents, so I ran home and proudly waved the story in the air. "Look, Mom, Dad, see what I've written," I said. My mom barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Sophia, but we're getting ready for James's math competition. Place it on the table and we'll look at it later." Later never came. When I found it days later, it was stained with coffee rings, unread and forgotten. This pattern continued through my childhood. In 7th grade, I won a statewide writing contest, but neither of my parents showed up to the ceremony. James had a football match the same day. "This is an important game for your brother, Sophia," my dad said softly. I understood my place in the family. High school was more of the same. I joined the school newspaper and eventually became editor-in-chief. I won state awards for my editorials and fiction, and my name appeared in youth magazines and local papers. But my family's response was always the same. "Writing is a nice hobby, Sophia, but it's not a real career. You should focus on something practical, like business or nursing." Even when my creative writing piece was published in an international writing collection for young authors, they didn't bother to buy a copy. Meanwhile, James's university admission letters were framed and hung in the main hall for everyone to admire. By the time I left for college, I had stopped sharing my accomplishments with them. I chose a university in Boston, far enough from Ohio that my scholarship could take me. It wasn't just a physical distance. I was carving out emotional space, trying to separate myself from the invisible daughter I had been. During those 4 years, I grew. My professors encouraged me, praised my writing, and pushed me to submit my work to publications. I began to see small successes, one poem here, a short story there. Each step felt like a brick in the foundation of my confidence, built without my family's knowledge or support. When I came home for the holidays, I gave vague answers when they asked about school. Speaking about my passions only led to dismissal, so I kept my success to myself. I sat through countless dinners, listening to them talk about James's university courses, his corporate training, and his girlfriend. From a good family after graduation. When I announced my intention to stay in Boston and pursue writing, my mother's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Boston is so expensive, Sophia. You'll be back home within 6 months when you can't pay rent," she predicted confidently. "Maybe you can get a job at the community college if you want to stay close to books." My father, in his typical fashion, tried to mediate. "What your mother means is that we worry about you. Writing is a tough business. We just don't want you setting yourself up for disappointment," my mother added. as if disappointment wasn't already the primary emotion I associated with family interactions over the years. As my adult life took shape in Boston, I developed two separate existences. There was Sophia, the accomplished writer with a growing reputation in literary circles, and Sophia, the disappointing daughter who worked some job in publishing as far as her family knew. The disconnect was painful, but protective. I couldn't bear to offer my achievements only to have them diminished again. Phone calls home became exercises in omission. I listened to news about James's promotions, my mother's social committee, accomplishments, neighborhood gossip, never volunteering information about my own life that mattered to me. I became skilled at deflection, turning questions back on the asker, keeping my responses superficial. Some might wonder why I maintained any relationship with my family at all. The answer is complicated, wrapped in layers of hope, obligation, and the stubborn belief that someday they might see me, really see me. Despite everything, they were my family, and some childish part of me still longed for their approval, even as the adult in me recognized how unlikely that was to ever happen. So I continued my twice-yearly visits home, steeling myself each time for the familiar feeling of fading into the background, of being overlooked and underestimated. I became the family ghost, present but not quite real in their eyes, and I learned to find validation elsewhere, building a life rich with meaningful friendships and professional respect that my family knew nothing about. When I moved to Boston after college, I carried little more than 2 suitcases, my laptop, and determined optimism. My mother's prediction about failing within 6 months hung over me like a challenge. I was prepared for struggle, but the reality of breaking into the publishing industry in Boston was even harder than I'd anticipated. I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn that I shared with 2 other aspiring creatives. My first job was as a barista at a coffee shop near Union Square, working morning shifts so I could use afternoons to drop off applications at publishing houses and literary agencies. At night, I wrote at a wobbly desk crammed into the corner of my bedroom, often until 2 or 3 in the morning. Rejection letters accumulated. I taped them to my wall as motivation rather than discouragement. Each no brought me one step closer to an eventual yes, or so I told myself during moments of doubt. My first break came 8 months after arriving in Boston. I landed an entry-level position as an editorial assistant at a small but respected literary magazine. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and ramen, but the experience was invaluable. I absorbed everything about the publishing process, from evaluating submissions to copy editing to production. It was there I met Eleanor Montgomery, a senior editor whose sharp eye and sharper tongue made junior staff members tremble. Eleanor was a legend in literary circles, known for discovering major talents and her uncompromising editorial standards. For reasons I never fully understood, she took an interest in my career. "You have a voice," she told me after reading a piece I'd been working on during lunch breaks. "Raw but distinctive. Keep writing." Coming from Eleanor, this was equivalent to lavish praise. Under her mentorship, my writing evolved. She pushed me to be more daring, to find the vulnerable places in my narratives, and dig deeper. When I complained about her brutal feedback, she was unsympathetic. "If you want gentle encouragement, join a community writing circle," she said. "If you want to be published, listen to me." I listened, and I wrote after my day job, after social obligations, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, when the city briefly quieted. I developed a discipline that bordered on obsession. My first published piece in a notable literary journal came 2 years after moving to Boston. I still remember staring at my name in print, running my fingers over the letters as if they might disappear. I called no one from my family. Instead, I celebrated with friends who understood what this milestone meant. From there, momentum built gradually. My byline appeared in increasingly prestigious publications. Editors began to recognize my name in submission piles. Literary agents started reaching out to ask if I was working on a book. I was. My first manuscript, a collection of interconnected short stories examining the invisible threads binding families across generations, took 3 years to complete. When it sold to a respected independent publisher, I felt a validation that no family approval could match. The book, titled Beneath Silent Waters, was published when I was 27. The initial print run was modest, but the critical response exceeded everyone's expectations. The New York Times Book Review called it a stunning debut from a writer of uncommon insight. The New Yorker included me in their Writers to Watch feature. Literary awards followed. For the book tour, I traveled to 12 cities across America and then to London, Paris, and Berlin. In each location, readers approached me with stories about how my writing had touched them, how they saw their own family dynamics reflected in my characters. The irony wasn't lost on me that strangers connected so deeply with work my own family had never read. I chose to publish under Sophia Anderson rather than my full name, Sophia and David Anderson, which partially explained why my family might not have stumbled across my work online. It wasn't a conscious decision to hide, more of a separation between my writing identity and the daughter who still visited Ohio twice a year. My second book, a novel titled The Weight of Unsaid Things, became what the industry calls a sleeper hit, starting with modest sales that grew steadily through word of mouth until it landed on the bestseller list 8 months after publication. The paperback edition featured quotes from famous authors I'd once studied in college classes. Surreal didn't begin to describe the feeling. By 30, I had an agent, a respected publisher, and the kind of career most writers dream about. My apartment in Brooklyn was no longer shared but my own, with a dedicated office where awards and framed book covers hung on walls. My work was taught in university creative writing programs. I gave guest lectures at Columbia, NYU, and other prestigious institutions. When introduced at literary events, the list of my accomplishments took longer and longer to recite. And yet, when I flew home for Christmas or my mother's birthday, I was still just Sophia, the daughter who had some vague job in publishing. The cognitive dissonance was sometimes overwhelming. "Are you still at that magazine?" my mother would ask vaguely over holiday dinners. "I'm working on different projects now," I'd answer truthfully but incompletely. "You know, James just got another promotion," she continued, and the conversation would shift away from me once again. The most recent development in my career came just 3 months before the family dinner that would change everything. My second novel had been optioned for film by an Academy Award-winning producer. I'd been flown to Los Angeles for meetings, put up in a luxury hotel, and treated like my words mattered enormously. The contrast between my professional respect and family invisibility had never been so stark. I sometimes asked myself why I continued to compartmentalize my life, why I didn't simply announce my accomplishments at the next family gathering. The answer was both simple and complex. I was protecting myself. After years of having my passion dismissed, my achievements minimized, I couldn't bear to offer my success only to have it treated as insignificant. The thought of my mother saying, "That's nice, dear," about my film deal made my stomach clench. So I maintained the separation, even as it created a hollow space inside me. In professional settings, I was confident, articulate, praised. In family settings, I reverted to the quiet, overlooked daughter, carefully hiding the life I'd built. "Why do you still go home at all?" my friend Samantha asked me once after I returned from a particularly difficult Thanksgiving visit. I had no simple answer. There was the complicated love I still felt for my family despite everything. There was hope, however faint, that someday things might change. And there was something else. A conviction that running away completely would mean they had won, had succeeded in making me believe I was truly invisible. So I kept visiting, and I kept succeeding. And the gap between my two lives grew wider, with each passing year until the night it all collapsed. When my brother brought his new fiancée home to meet the family, and everything I'd built and everything I'd hidden collided in a single Google search. My parents still lived in it was the same family home where I had grown up, a fact that made each visit home feel like stepping back in time. As I pulled into the driveway that evening, I noticed fresh flowers planted in the front beds and new curtains in the living room windows. My mom always made special preparations when James visited, a small reminder of the family hierarchy. I parked behind an unfamiliar BMW, which I assumed belonged to Emma, my brother's fiancée. This would be our first meeting, and I couldn't help feeling curious about the woman who had captured my brother's heart. James had dated many women over the years, but none had made it to the meet the parents stage. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My dad stood there, gray hair neatly combed, wearing what I recognized as his good sweater. "Sophia, you made it," he said, giving me a brief, awkward hug. Everyone's in the living room. I followed him through the foyer, passing the familiar gallery wall of family photos. I noted that the most recent additions were all of James, his graduate school graduation, vacation photos, none featuring me. It was like watching my gradual erasure from family history. In the living room, my mom was laughing at something, the performative laugh she used in social situations. She looked up as I entered, her smile remaining but cooling several degrees. "Sophia? Finally, we were about to start without you," she said, gesturing toward the attractive couple on the sofa. "You know what traffic is like," I said, leaning in for the obligatory cheek kiss. James stood, genuinely pleased to see me. "Sophia, come meet Emma." I turned my attention to the woman, rising gracefully from the sofa. Emma was tall and slim, with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. She wore simple but obviously expensive clothes that suggested taste and confidence rather than showing off. "I've heard so much about you," Emma said, extending her hand. "James says you live in Boston. I love visiting the city." "All good things," I replied with a smile, ignoring my mom's barely audible snort. "Shall we move to the dining room?" my mother suggested. "I've had the roast in for hours." The dining room was set with the good china and crystal, another honor typically reserved for James's visits or my mother's bridge club luncheons. I noted the seating arrangement with a familiar resignation. My dad at the head of the table, my mom at the foot, James and Emma on one side, and me alone on the other, furthest from both parents. My mom had outdone herself with the meal: roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, garlic mashed potatoes, honey-glazed carrots, and homemade rolls. It was James's favorite menu, the one she prepared for special celebrations. "Emma, tell us again how you two met," my mother prompted after pouring the wine. "I want Sophia to hear the story." Emma smiled at James before answering. "We met at a charity auction for the Children's Hospital. I was organizing the event, and James was there representing his firm. He outbid everyone for a weekend sailing package, even though he told me earlier he gets seasick." She laughed. "I thought anyone that determined deserved at least one dinner." "Best money I ever spent," James added, taking her hand. My mom beamed at them. "And Emma's family is from Shaker Heights," she told me, naming one of the most affluent suburbs of Cleveland. "Her father is a cardiothoracic surgeon at Cleveland Clinic." I recognized this as my mother's shorthand for "comes from money and good social standing," her highest praise. "What about you, Sophia?" Emma asked, turning her attention to me. "James mentioned you work in publishing in Boston." "That sounds fascinating." Before I could answer, my mom jumped in. "Sophia does something with books. A small press or magazine, isn't it, dear?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued. "Nothing like James's position, of course. He just made partner at 35, youngest in the firm's history." "It's a publishing house," I said quietly. "I work with authors on their books." "That must be so interesting," Emma persisted. "What kind of books do you work on again?" My mom interrupted. "Sophia always liked to read. Remember that summer you barely left a room, always with your nose in a book?" She laughed and turned to Emma. I practically had to force myself to go outside and get some sun." The conversation shifted to wedding plans. Emma and James were considering a June ceremony the following year, possibly at her parents' country club. My mom was delighted, already, discussing flower arrangements and menu options. I ate quietly, occasionally nodding or offering brief comments when directly addressed. This was familiar territory, being present but not really included, the background character in the James show. Emma, however, kept trying to draw me into the conversation. "We're still figuring out the bridal party," she said, looking at me. "But I'd love it if you'd be one of my bridesmaids, Sophia. I don't have sisters, and it would mean a lot to me." I was genuinely surprised by the offer. "I'd be honored," I said, touched by her inclusion. "That is, if Sophia can take time away from her important job," my mom commented with a thin smile. "Boston publishing is so demanding, apparently." James shot her a look. "Mom, come on!" Emma, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to redirect. "What are you working on currently, Sophia? Any books we should look out for?" It was the opening I'd both longed for and dreaded for years. I could tell them about my recent success, the film option, the awards. I could finally claim my accomplishments in this house where I'd been diminished for so long. But years of conditioning kicked in. I shrugged slightly. Just the usual projects, nothing special. My mom seized the moment. She's just a nobody with some office job, she laughed dismissively. Not everyone can be as ambitious as you and James. The table fell silent. My dad studied his plate. James looked uncomfortable. I felt the familiar sting, sharper for being delivered in front of someone new. Emma's brow furrowed slightly. She looked at me with curiosity, then discreetly reached for her phone beneath the table. The wedding venue has a 6-month waiting list, my mom continued, oblivious to the awkwardness she'd created. But Emma's mom knows the events. Coordinator. As she spoke, I noticed Emma looking down at her phone, her expression changing from curiosity to surprise, then to something like amazement. She glanced up at me, then back at her phone, scrolling with increasing interest. I had no idea what. She was reading, but something told me our carefully separated worlds were about to collide. The dinner conversation continued around me, my mom dominating with wedding talk while my dad occasionally nodded in agreement. James contributed details about the honeymoon they were planning in Italy. I responded when necessary, but my attention was increasingly drawn to Emma, who continued to scroll through something on her phone, her eyes widening occasionally. We're thinking 4 or 5 tiers for the cake, my mom was saying. Nothing too ostentatious, but befitting James's position at the firm. Emma looked up from her phone suddenly, her gaze fixing on me with an intensity that made me shift in my seat. "Excuse me," she said, interrupting my mom mid-sentence about cake flavors. "I hope this isn't rude, but I have to ask." She turned to me, phone still in hand. "Sophia, are you the Sophia Anderson? The author?" The question hung in the air, and pairs of eyes turned to me. The silence was deafening. "What are you talking about?" my mom asked, looking confused. Emma held up her phone, displaying what I recognized as my author page on the Penguin Random House website. "Sophia Anderson, author of Beneath Silent Waters and the Weight of Unsaid Things," she read. "Winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award and the P.N. Faulkner Award." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with excitement. "That's you, isn't it?" The photo matches. My heart pounded. The moment I'd both feared and secretly fantasized about for years was happening, and I felt completely unprepared. "Let me see that," James said, leaning toward Emma's phone. His eyes widened as he scrolled through whatever was on the screen. "Holy shit," he whispered, looking up at me. "Sophia, is this really you?" My dad had gone completely still, fork suspended halfway to his mouth. My mom reached across the table and practically snatched the phone from Emma's hand. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, but her voice lacked conviction as she stared at the screen. "Some other Sophia Anderson." "No mistake," Emma said, taking her phone back and continuing to read. "Sophia Anderson's writing has been compared to Joan Didion." Emma continued scrolling. "And Alice Munro, her debut collection of short stories, was described by the New York Times as breathtakingly assured, and her novel spent 18 weeks on the bestseller list." She looked up at me with genuine admiration. "I can't believe this. I actually read your book last year for my book club. It was incredible." My mom's face had drained of color. My dad was now leaning toward Emma, trying to get another glimpse of the phone. "There's more," Emma continued, clearly unaware of the family drama she was exposing. "It says here, your novel has been optioned for film by Paramount, with production scheduled to begin next year." She scrolled further. "And you were just featured in the New Yorker's 40 Under 40 list of influential artists." James, was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and what sounded like hurt. I took a deep breath, studying myself. This was it, the moment when my 2 separate lives collapsed into one. "I did try," I said quietly. "Many times." My mom shook her head. "That's ridiculous. You never mentioned being a famous author. We would have remembered something like that." Actually, I did, I replied, my voice gaining strength. When my first story was published in The Atlantic, I called home and told you. You said, "That's nice," and changed the subject to James's new car. My dad frowned, seeming to search his memory. My mom's lips pressed into a thin line. When my book was published, I continued, I sent you both signed copies. Did you ever open the package or read the card I included? My dad looked genuinely confused. I don't recall any package. It came right before Christmas 3 years ago, I said. Mom said it was probably just work stuff and put it in the guest room. I saw it there unopened when I visited that year. Emma was looking increasingly uncomfortable, suddenly aware of the family dynamic she had inadvertently exposed. James kept glancing between me and our parents, as if trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the accomplished author, on Emma's phone. Well, you should have made it clear it was important, my mom said defensively. You know how busy things get around the holidays. Emma cleared her throat gently. Your books are really quite remarkable, Sophia. The way you write about family dynamics and unspoken expectations, it's so insightful. She paused. Actually, now that I think about it, some of those family scenes feel almost familiar. The implication hung in the air. Had I been writing about my own family all along? The answer was yes and no. My characters were fictional, but the emotional truths they navigated, the feeling of invisibility, the yearning for recognition, those came directly from my experience in this very house. May I see? My father asked, finally finding his voice. Emma handed him her phone and he put on his reading glasses to study the screen. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to something that looked almost like pride. National Book Critics Circle Award, he murmured. That's a big deal, isn't it? It's one of the most prestigious literary awards in America, Emma confirmed. My mom was struggling to process this new reality. If you're so successful, she said with a note of skepticism, why do you still live in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn? Why don't you drive a better car? It was such a typical response, measuring success by material possessions rather than achievement or fulfillment, that I almost laughed. My apartment isn't tiny, Mom. It's a 2-bedroom in Park Slope with an office where I write. And I take the subway because parking in New York is a nightmare, not because I can't afford a car. There's a whole Wikipedia page, Emma added, apparently oblivious to the tension as she continued scrolling. And look, here's a video of Sophia accepting her Penn Faulkner Award. She turned her phone around to show a clip of me on stage in a black evening gown, thanking the committee and my publisher. The surreal quality of the moment intensified. My family watching a video of me accepting a major literary award while sitting at the dinner table, where I'd been dismissed as just a nobody minutes earlier. The realization that I was not who they thought I was, had never been who they thought I was, seemed to hit each of them differently. My dad looked bewildered but impressed. James seemed shocked, but also curious. And my mom looked like her entire worldview was being challenged, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment. All this time, James said, slowly, while we thought you were just... He trailed off, perhaps realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. Just a nobody? I supplied, repeating my mother's words from earlier. Yes, all this time, the dinner that had been planned to celebrate James and Emma's engagement had transformed into something entirely different. The balance of power had shifted, and none of us quite knew how to proceed. Emma, perhaps sensing the rising tension, attempted to lighten the mood. I feel like I'm having dinner with a celebrity, she said with a nervous laugh. I recommended your book to everyone I know after I read it. My mom's voice cut through the air. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Sophia would have told us if she was a successful writer. She turned to me, her expression hardening. Why would you keep something like this from your family unless you were making it up? The accusation stung, but it was so typically my mom, unable to admit she might have been wrong, turning the situation to make herself the victim rather than acknowledging her role in my silence. I didn't keep it from you, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. You just never listened. That's nonsense, my mom replied. We always supported your little writing hobby. Hobby? I repeated the word like acid on my tongue. Is that what you think this is, Mom? James interjected. Emma just showed us Sophia's professional author page and Wikipedia entry. This isn't a hobby. My dad, still staring at Emma's phone, looked up. There are reviews here from the New York Times, the Washington Post, pictures of you at literary events with famous people. He seemed genuinely perplexed. Why wouldn't you share this with us? The question, asked without my mother's accusatory tone, deserved an honest answer. I did try to share it with you, I said, meeting his gaze. When I got my first book deal, I called home ecstatic. Mom answered and said she couldn't talk because she was on her way to James's softball game. She said she'd call back but never did. My father frowned, glancing at my mother, who avoided his eyes. When my first book was published, I continued, I sent you both signed copies with a note about how much it would mean to have your support at my New York launch event. You never responded. I checked airline prices, hoping you might come, but you didn't even acknowledge receiving the books. We were probably busy, my mom said defensively. You can't expect us to drop everything for her. For what? Mom? I interrupted, years of suppressed feelings finally breaking free. For your daughter's greatest achievement? Because that's exactly what you did for James every single time. You never missed a single one of his games or ceremonies or celebrations. Not one. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Emma placed a hand on his arm, her expression sympathetic. When I won my first major award, I continued, I called home from the hotel right after the ceremony, still wearing my formal dress. Dad, you answered and said Mom was asleep and you were watching a game. You said to call back tomorrow. When I did, neither of you picked up. My father's face flushed with what looked like shame. I didn't know it was important. How could you not know? The question burst from me with more emotion than I'd intended. How could my own parents not know or care about the most significant moments of my career? Did you ever once Google my name? Did you ever wonder what I was actually doing in New York all these years? My mom's lips thinned. You always were dramatic, Sophia. If your writing was really so successful, why wouldn't you make sure we knew about it? Because every time I tried, you changed the subject to James. I replied, my voice breaking, slightly. Every single time. After a while, I stopped trying. It hurt too much to keep offering pieces of myself only to have them ignored. Emma cleared her throat gently. Your novel, she said, looking at me. The one about the youngest daughter whose art is discovered after she leaves home. Was that autobiographical? Before I could answer, my mother cut in. Are you saying you wrote stories about us? About family business? How could you do something so— I write fiction, I interrupted firmly. My characters are not you, but the emotional truth of feeling invisible in your own family. Yes, I drew on that experience. James looked increasingly uncomfortable. I had no idea you felt this way, he said quietly. You never said anything. Would you have listened if I had? I asked, not unkindly. You were busy being the golden child, James. That wasn't your fault, but it was our reality. My dad, who had been scrolling through Emma's phone, looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Some of these reviews mention how your work explores themes of parental neglect and conditional love. His voice was quiet. Is that how you see us, Sophia? As neglectful parents? The question hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken hurt. I took a deep breath. I see you as parents who had room for only one successful child. I said carefully. And I wasn't that child, so I built a life and a career that didn't depend on your approval or even your awareness. And now, here we are. My mom stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to clear the dessert plates, she said, though no one had finished eating. She began gathering dishes with shaking hands. Barbara, sit down, my dad said with unusual firmness. This is important. What's important is that Sophia has apparently been harboring all these resentments for years, my mom replied, her voice tight. Writing books about what terrible parents we are. Mom, that's not what Sophia said, James interrupted. And you did just call her a nobody less than an hour ago. My mom froze, plates in hand, as if she'd forgotten that comment. Emma winced visibly. I never said you were terrible parents, I clarified. But yes, I was hurt repeatedly. And instead of confronting you, I channeled those feelings into my writing. That's what writers do. We transform our experiences into stories. Stories that made you famous while making us look bad, my mom said bitterly. No one knows the books are connected to you, I replied. I've never said they were autobiographical. That's your guilt talking, not my words. The room fell silent. My mom remained standing, clutching the plates like a shield. My dad looked lost in thought. James and Emma exchanged uncomfortable glances. I considered getting up and leaving. It would be easier than continuing this painful conversation, but something kept me in my seat. Perhaps the same stubborn persistence that had kept me writing through years of rejection before my first success. I never wanted to have this conversation, I admitted. But now that we're here, maybe it's time for some honesty. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career that fulfills me. I did it without your support or acknowledgement. That shouldn't diminish your pride in James's accomplishments. There was always room for both of us to succeed, even if you couldn't see it. My father removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I don't know what to say, Sophia. I'm sorry we missed so much. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard in that house, and it landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. My mom's defenses seemed to crumble slightly. She set the plates down and sank back into her chair. Why didn't you make us understand? She asked, but the accusatory edge had left her voice. That wasn't my responsibility, I said gently. Parents are supposed to see their children, both of them, not just the one who fits their preferred narrative. James reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. I didn't see it either, he said. I'm sorry, Sophia. The acknowledgement from my brother, unexpected and sincere, brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. Emma, who had been quiet during the confrontation, spoke up. For what it's worth, she said, your books are beautiful. They've touched so many people. That's a rare gift. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, I realized something had fundamentally changed. The family dynamic, calcified, over decades, had cracked open. What would grow in its place remained to be seen. But there was no going back to the way things had been. For better or worse, I was finally visible in my parents' home. The remainder of dinner passed in a strange mixture of tension and revelation. My mom made a half-hearted attempt to serve dessert, a chocolate mousse that sat largely untouched as the conversation continued in fits and starts. Emma, seemingly determined to normalize the situation, asked thoughtful questions about my writing, process, and upcoming projects. I answered cautiously at first, then with increasing openness, as I realized her interest was genuine. I'm actually working on a new novel, I admitted, sharing details of my work publicly with my family for the first time. It's about sisters separated in childhood who reconnect as adults, only to discover they've been living parallel lives. That sounds fascinating, Emma said. Will it be published next year? If I meet my deadline, yes, I said. My editor is hoping for a spring release. My mom pushed her dessert around her plate. I suppose we'll have to wait for the movie version, she said, a half-hearted attempt at humor that fell flat. Actually, I replied, if you'd like to read it before then, I could send you the galleys once they're ready. The offer hung in the air. In a tentative offer of an olive branch, my dad cleared his throat. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd like to read your books. All of them. James nodded in agreement. Me too. I can't believe my little sister is a famous author and I didn't even know. I'm not exactly famous, I clarified. Literary fiction isn't exactly celebrity status. Your Wikipedia page would disagree, Emma remarked with a smile, and so would the New York Times. After dessert, we moved to the living room. My mom excused herself to the kitchen, claiming she needed to start on the dishes, though. I suspected she needed space to process everything that had happened. Emma touched James's arm. Why don't you help your mom? I'd love to chat with Sophia a bit more about her work. James seemed relieved to have a direction and headed to the kitchen. My dad mumbled something about checking the score of the Indians' game and disappeared into his den, leaving Emma and me alone. As soon as they were out of earshot, Emma turned to me with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry if I caused problems," she said. "I had no idea they didn't know about your career." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "This has been building for years. It probably needed to happen." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I recognized your name immediately," she confessed. "When James mentioned his sister Sophia was a writer in New York, I wondered if it might be you. But when I got here and no one mentioned your books, I thought I must be mistaken." "So the Google search at dinner was deliberate," she admitted. "When your mom made that comment about you being a nobody, I couldn't believe it. I knew I'd read your work. I thought maybe showing them would—" She trailed off, looking uncertain. "Force them to acknowledge you?" I suggested maybe it needed to come from someone outside the family. They might never have believed me. Emma nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "Was that terrible of me?" I considered the question. "No," I finally said. "Maybe it needed to come from someone outside the family." We were interrupted by James's return from the kitchen. He sat beside Emma, looking at me with new eyes. "Mom's upset," he reported. "Dad's talking to her in the kitchen now." "I'm sorry about that," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted to hurt them. James shook his head. "Don't apologize. I'm the one who should be sorry. I never realized—" He paused, struggling with his words. "I never saw how they treated you differently. I was so caught up in my own stuff." "You were a kid too, James," I reminded him. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix our parents' behavior." "Still," he insisted, "I should have noticed. All those awards ceremonies and publications you mentioned, I never even asked what you were doing in New York all these years." "Not really." Emma squeezed his hand supportively. "The thing is," James continued, "I always thought you were the lucky one. Mom and Dad were so focused on me, pushing me constantly toward success, monitoring every grade and achievement. You seemed free to do your own thing without all that pressure. I never realized the flip side of that freedom was invisibility." His perception stunned me. All those years I'd envied him, the attention and approval. He'd envied me, the freedom from scrutiny. It was a perspective I'd never considered. "Maybe we can start over," he suggested. "As adults. I want to know about your life, Sophia, your real life, not the sanitized version you've been sharing at holidays." The offer touched me, deeply. "I like that," I said simply. My dad appeared in the doorway, looking older than he had at dinner. "Your mother needs some time," he said. "This has been a lot to process." He sat heavily in his armchair, the same seat he'd occupied throughout my childhood. "I've been looking through your author page on my phone," he admitted. "The reviews, the awards, I had no idea. Sophia, no idea at all." "I know, Dad," I said gently. "No, you don't understand," he insisted. "We failed you. All those times you tried to tell us about your work and we just didn't hear you." He looked up, his eyes damp. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. So proud. And I'm ashamed it took a stranger to make me see it." Emma shifted uncomfortably at being called a stranger, but remained silent. "It's not too late," I said, surprising myself with the words. "To be interested, to be involved, if you want to be." He nodded firmly. "We do. Your mom, too. Even if she can't say it yet." The evening ended earlier than planned. The emotional revelations had exhausted everyone. As I prepared to leave, Emma hugged me warmly. "This wasn't the dinner I expected," she said with a rueful smile. "But I'm glad I finally got to meet the real Sophia Anderson. I'm a genuine fan of your work." James hugged me too, longer than usual. "This doesn't fix everything," he said quietly. "But it's a start, right?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. My dad walked me to the door. "Will you come back for Sunday dinner next week?" he asked. "I'll have read your first book by then. We could talk about it." The invitation, so simple yet so meaningful, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'll be there, I promised. My mom remained in the kitchen, not emerging, to say goodbye. I understood. She needed time. Her worldview had been challenged in a fundamental way. Change wouldn't happen overnight. As I drove back to my hotel, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had begun to shift. My two separate lives had collided, and while the crash had been painful, perhaps something new and more authentic could emerge from the wreckage. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that my next visit home might be different, that I might finally be seen, fully seen, by the people who had shaped me, for better and worse. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 3 months after, the dinner that changed everything, a package arrived at my Brooklyn apartment. The return address was my parents' home in Ohio. I opened it with curious fingers to find my books, not the copies I'd sent years ago, but new ones recently purchased. Inside the cover of Beneath Silent Waters was a note in my father's precise handwriting. "Sophia," he wrote, "I've read this twice now. The first time to know the story, the second time to hear your voice in it. I'm sorry it took me so long to listen. Your words are beautiful. They matter. You matter. Love." Dad, I traced his handwriting with my fingertip, feeling the indentations on the page. In the 3 months since Emma had Googled my name at the dinner table, small changes had accumulated, like snowflakes gradually transforming the landscape of my family relationships. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. James's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, did Dad's package arrive?" he asked when I answered. "Just opened it," I confirmed. "It's unexpected," he said. "He ordered your books the day after that dinner." "James, he's been reading them over and over. Mom, too, though she's less vocal about it." Our conversations had changed since that night. We spoke weekly now, longer talks that went beyond surface pleasantries. James had become genuinely interested in my life and work, asking thoughtful questions about my writing process and upcoming projects. "How's the new book coming?" he asked now. "Just finished the second draft," I told him. "My editor thinks it's the strongest thing I've written." "That's great, Sophia, really great." He paused. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. Emma and I were wondering if you'd consider doing a reading at our engagement party next month. From your work, I mean. Something that matters. To you." The invitation stunned me. "Are you sure? It's your celebration. I don't want to take focus from us." James laughed. "Sophia, my sister is a celebrated author. I'm proud of that. I want our friends and family to know who you really are, not the version we all pretended you were for so many years." His words touched me deeply. "Then yes, I'd be honored." "Great. And one more thing. Mom's been rearranging the seating chart for the dinner. She wants you at the main table with us and Emma's parents." The significance of this wasn't lost on me. In our family, seating arrangements had always been hierarchical, with the most important guests placed closest to my parents. My traditional spot at family gatherings had been on the periphery, an afterthought. This change, small, as it might seem to outsiders, represented a fundamental shift in family dynamics. "Is Mom okay with all this?" I asked cautiously. James sighed. "She's trying, Sophia. It's not easy for her to admit how wrong she was all these years. But Dad's been surprisingly firm about it. I've never seen him stand up to her like this before." The thought of my father, typically so conflict-averse, advocating for me brought unexpected emotion. "Emma's been great, too," James continued. "She made Mom join her book club, and guess whose book they're reading next month?" I laughed at the image of Mom in a book club discussing my novel. I'd pay to see that. "Mom's nervous about it," James admitted. "She's afraid she won't understand it properly or say the wrong thing. I think she's finally realizing what she missed all these years." After we hung up, I sat with my father's note and this new information, trying to process how much had changed in such a relatively short time. The family pattern, established over decades, was being rewritten, awkwardly but genuinely. My mom had called the previous week. Our conversation, stilted but revealing, had gone something like this. She mentioned almost casually that she'd told her bridge club about my books, she'd said. Marilyn Jenkins' daughter is an English professor at Ohio State. She's apparently assigned your novel in her contemporary literature course. Marilyn was quite impressed when I mentioned you were my daughter. The pride in her voice, however reluctant, was new. She was discovering, perhaps for the first time, that my achievements could reflect positively on her, just as James's always had. It wasn't the pure, unconditional recognition I might have hoped for, but it was progress. The engagement party arrived faster than expected. I pulled into my parents' driveway with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. The house felt different somehow, though nothing had physically changed. Perhaps it was my own perception that had shifted. Emma greeted me with a warm hug. "I'm so glad you're here early. Come see the setup in the backyard." The garden had been transformed, with string lights hanging between the trees and floral, arrangements brightening up the space. A small podium stood near the patio, complete with a microphone. "For your reading," Emma explained. "I hope that's okay. Some of my family are big fans of your work. My cousin Abigail teaches English and uses your stories in her classes." Inside, my mom was directing the caterers with her usual precision. She paused when she saw me, her expression softening slightly. "Sophia? Good. You're here. I've put you at table 1 with us and the Clarks," she said, referring to Emma's parents. "I've also told the bartender to have champagne ready after your reading." Such consideration from her was unprecedented. "Thanks, Mom," I said simply, not wanting to make too much of it and risk her retreating. "Your hair looks nice," she added awkwardly. "The length suits you." It was a small compliment, but for my mom it felt significant. My dad emerged from his den, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Sophia," he exclaimed, embracing me with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "I finished your second book last week. The scene where the protagonist confronts her mentor at the awards ceremony, brilliant writing." We talked about the book for several minutes, a surreal experience in a house where my writing had been invisible for so long. My dad had always been an avid reader, but now he was reading my words, engaging with my thoughts, and seeing me through my work. As guests began to arrive, I noticed a subtle but significant shift. When my mom introduced me to her friends, she didn't just say, "This is Sophia, our daughter." Instead, she said, "This is Sophia, our daughter, the author." Her books have won several major awards. The pride in her voice, though newly discovered, was unmistakable. She was learning. Late, perhaps, but still learning to see me clearly. James and Emma circulated among the guests, often stopping to include me in conversations, making sure I wasn't relegated to the background, as had been the pattern at family gatherings throughout my life. When it was time for my reading, Emma's father introduced me with genuine admiration, listing my accomplishments with the respect they deserved. I approached the podium, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: vulnerability in sharing my work in this setting, pride in my accomplishments, and lingering traces of the insecure daughter I had been for so long. I had chosen a passage from my second novel, a scene where a character finally finds her voice after years of silence. As I read, I was aware of my parents listening intently, perhaps hearing echoes of our own complicated relationship in the fictional narrative. The applause afterward was enthusiastic. My mom, to my surprise, wiped tears from her eyes. Later, as the party wound down, she approached me while I was chatting with Emma's mother. "Your reading was beautiful," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I never knew you could write like that." "You never asked to know," I replied, not accusingly, but simply stating a truth. She nodded, acknowledging the point. "I'm asking now," she said, better late than never. It was offered as a question, tentative and uncertain. The mother, who had always been so confident, so sure of her opinions and judgments, was asking for a second chance. "Better late than never," I agreed. Our relationship would never be perfect. Too much water had flowed under that particular bridge. But the current was changing direction, slowly but perceptibly. Where once there had been dismissal and invisibility, there was now recognition, however belated. As I drove back to New York the next day, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The painful years of being overlooked had fueled my determination to succeed, to create work that demanded attention. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's failure to see me had ultimately made me more visible to the world. I had never written for their approval or recognition. I had written because I had to, because the stories inside me demanded release. Yet there was an undeniable satisfaction in finally being seen by the people who had shaped me, for better and worse. My phone dinged with a text from James. Dad just ordered your books for his whole golf club. Mom's horrified about the inappropriate language they'll all read. Progress comes in strange forms. I laughed out loud in my empty car. Progress, indeed. The invisible daughter had finally been seen. The nobody had become somebody, not because a Google search had revealed my accomplishments, but because I had persisted in believing my voice mattered, even when those who should have heard it first didn't listen. That persistence, more than any award or recognition, was the true measure of my success.